Why do you think the markets are crazy here? Because it's not, yes, we have seen some of the tariffs actually go into an effect.
Right.
But there is a little bit of time to strike a deal.
Yeah, there is some time to strike a deal, but boy, that tail of risk is just getting fatter and fatter as we go along. And so far, the Chinese have shown no interest in backing down, and neither does Donald Trump. So the likelihood that we're going to strike a deal, I mean, let's just say it's 50-50. I mean, those are some pretty high odds of risk, and the consequences of a trade war would be devastating for both the U.S. and the Chinese economy.
Yes, I hear you on all of those fronts, but there is this view now in Washington, and it's bipartisan as well, that the U.S. needs to stand up to China on trade. And again, Democrats are starting to sound this note as well. There's never really an optimal time to take action. So given the global backdrop, given the strength of the U.S. economy, and it's something that Jay Powell alluded to in his comments earlier today, is the timing for this potential trade conflict, war, tiff, scuffle, however you want to characterize it, is it perhaps good? I mean, there's not a better time to do it, isn't there?
Well, it's sort of like launching a war. Is there ever a good time to launch a war? And the language around this, of a war is an interesting one because wars cost money. And so no matter if it's a good time or a bad time, this comes with a cost attached to it. So my view is that, I would like to see us use other means to apply pressure to China than to use the blunt force of tariffs. And when you look at some of the consequences here, I love to talk about the washing machine tariffs. It's funny, it's such an obscure area, but the washing machine tariffs were announced in January.
Yeah, they've gone into effect.
They've gone into effect. They were 15%. How much have washing machines gone up in price?
15%?
17%. So the reality is who's going to pay for this trade war? It's going to be the U.S. consumer. So when you talk about like tariffs of 25% on automobiles, and some of it, it's just content driven. So, maybe it's not going to be a full 25%. Maybe it's going to be 15%. If we were to get a 15% increase in auto prices in the United States, that represents 6% of CPI, which means we would get a 1% surge in the price level. Now, a 1% surge in the price level is going to cause the Federal Reserve to react. And if they decide they have to start leaning against these price increases by picking up the pace of tightening, then it's going to devastate the entire economy. And the strength that you're talking about, Scarlet, today, we may end up very well undermining in this process.
Talk to me about timeline, because the washing machine tariffs have already gone into effect. So we've got some potentially maybe angry people out there who have now had to spend a lot more on washing machines.
Or some dirty clothes.
Right. Or, who are waiting for that new purchase and using the washboard instead. When these other tariffs go into effect, when prices start to rise, one would think there would then be a consumer-led backlash, some political pressure, but how long does it then take to get to the negotiating table? And is the president even susceptible to that kind of pressure? Well,
I think you're asking all the right questions. I'm not so sure that if we get to this point, especially if we view it as an attack on the Chinese, I think that won't go over well in China. And they'll say they have to stand up to the United States. And so this digging in process could go on for years. And, the political backlash, I'm not so sure about. Because I think that, I've met people who tell me that we're going to hurt them more than they're going to hurt us. And I think that's sort of irrational thinking.
Well, if people are being hurt, they're not really caring if the other people are being hurt more. In other words, if the individual U.S. consumer is paying more, do they really care if Chinese consumers are also paying more?
Well, I think there is a hardcore element in this country who might look at this and say, hey, you know what? So I'm paying 15% more for my car. I'm going to make my car last another year or two. But we really have to give it to these Chinese or to these Europeans or these Canadians or whichever one you want to pick